On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're talking about Ross Colton scoring a goal the other night. Does this mean he is on his way to becoming hot? We also talk about Steven Stamkos accumulating a career assist number 500. How many more do we have to go? Is it going to be 500 more? Is it going to be 1,000 more? We talk about all of that and more, but first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'd like to thank all of you for making us your first listen of the day. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're discussing Ross Colton picked up a goal the other night. Does this mean he's going to finally start to get hot? We talk about that, as well as Steven Stamkos. He picked up his 500th career assist on the overtime goal pass to Alex Killorn that won the game against Dallas. We talk about that. Steven Stamkos, what this means for his career. Where does he stand? I mean, we already know where he stands in Lightning history, but where does he stand in NHL history? We talk about that as well. But first, I just want to remind all of you to like and subscribe to this podcast. Follow us wherever podcasts are distributed. We are available on YouTube. Go ahead. And if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment below. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the podcast. Hit that notification button. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you are fully well aware and ready to listen to us. And go ahead and listen to us and subscribe wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We'd love to hear from all of you, and follow us on our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. So Ross Colton picked up his first goal the other night in really what seemed like forever for Ross. I believe that was his only his fourth goal of the season, and his 8th point of the season as well. And Ross has really not gotten off to the best of starts this season after what the season that he had last year following his abbreviated rookie season. Picking up, as we all know, we spoke about Ross when he was actually on the show, Ross Colton, when he was on the show. And go ahead and listen back to that episode. We got to get him back on. That was a fun episode. We want to catch up with Ross Colton, see what he's been up to. Obviously on the ice, we know that, but let's see what he's been up to off the ice as well. But we all know the Ross Colton story by now. And if you haven't, has his rookie season during the 2020-21 season. Scores the game-winning goal the game-winning goal in which was the series clinching game in the Stanley Cup final against Montreal. Has a great follow-up season in 21-22, 79 games played, 22 goals, and 39 points. Really looks like at that point that Ross Colton is really going to start to pick it up a notch each year. That's really the trajectory that it looked like he was on. And through 16 games thus far this year, 4 goals, 8 points, a plus-minus of -4. At first, I wasn't really surprised. I'm not really worried for Ross Colton right now. I mean, he's playing his game. He's playing his game the way we all expect him to play. That's aggressive, playing with his heart on his sleeve, putting himself in good chances to score. And as well as making the right pass for the most part. I mean, really, this team has been kind of not good. And kind of not good is I guess a nice phrase, or just a nice way in general of putting it with this team in terms of their puck possession. But yeah, Ross, all things aside, I mean, numbers, if you're taking the numbers out of the equation, I think Ross Colton thus far has been having a pretty Ross Colton-like season. And so really the numbers I feel like are not really that good of a measure of what his performance has been thus far this season. But still, numbers are numbers at the end of the day. In the game of hockey, the numbers do matter. They do, at the end of the day, reflect the body of work that your team has put out or players on your team have put in throughout the course of a season. And thus far, I think, for a player who really has to be on a second line, and I think on some teams in the NHL, possibly the first, Ross playing on the third. I think, he's gotten some burn on the second line this year, but mainly on the third line, alongside Nemestikov. I think that, you know, I think that his numbers should be better. If we're looking at, if Nemestikov had Ross Colton's numbers right now, I think we'd all be satisfied. But I think it's a little bit of a letdown. 4 goals and 8 assists, 8 points, because it's Ross Colton. He's coming off a 22 goal season, so there is the expectations that are high, that come with a season like that, following a season like that. Excuse me. So, you know, he got his fourth goal of the season the other night against Dallas. Good chance early on, uh, and really, I think that what it comes down to, maybe his lack of production, if you really want to call it. Because I said, it's not a disappointing start to the season for him. I'm sure if you asked him, he would like his numbers, his point total to be a little bit higher. Um, but I think that, you know this might be because he's a very streaky player. We all know that about Colton. I think he's proven that in the very short time that he's here, that he is a player that, once he gets hot, he is one of the best players on the ice. And I think that, that goal the other night against Dallas, against a goaltender such as Jake Ottinger, I thought, in that moment, regardless if he was going to net another one, I thought that that was going to be something that he was going to be able to carry over, because it wasn't, an overly fantastic goal. It was a one-timer, right from one of his favorite spots on the ice. So really what it comes down to is, it's a very good goal that he could easily replicate if given the opportunity, which he will be given the opportunity with. But it's going to be a tall task, to ask for the Lightning, and for especially Ross Colton to take their goal output that they've had in recent games and replicate that. Especially, you got Jacob Markstrom coming to you tomorrow night against the Calgary Flames, and then you got UC Saros, with Nashville on Saturday. So, two very good goaltenders. You might differ on how you feel about those teams. In terms of talent, they both kind of pretty much have identical records. So, obviously Jacob Markstrom is a little bit better, I think, in my book than UC Saros. But I think at the end of the day, Ross Colton has beat some of the best goalies, and has scored against some of the best goalies. But I think really what it comes down to, it's not the goalies, that I'm worried about. It's more so what is going on around Ross Colton on the ice, because, like I said, he is a player that if the opportunities are there, 9 times out of 10, I believe at least that he's going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But if the opportunities aren't given to him, by his teammates, by his line mates, then things are going to be a little bit difficult. Ross Colton does not really have that ability right now, or hasn't shown this year that he is able to make plays on his own. I mean, we've seen flashes in a pan of that last season and at certain points this year, but most notably last year, I mean, we saw it almost every once a game, and I think maybe that's why you see teams kind of start to close in on him a lot faster now when he kind of tries to make that move towards the slot. I think really, his ability and his desire to really skate up on the goaltender. I think a lot of teams caught up on that really relatively early, and now he's been forced to sort of rely more on his teammates. So we're gonna keep a close eye on Ross Colton in the upcoming games, because I firmly believe, I said it coming into this year, I said it mostly throughout certain points last season, especially going into last season as well. His production is a vital part of this team, and if he could be successful, I think Tampa will be largely successful, and we'll start to see more wins out of this team down the line. So we're going to talk about Steven Stamkos in just a little bit. He got his 500th career assist in last night's game. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor, and that is BetOnline.net. Now, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs, info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer, esports, and most importantly, hockey. They got it all. I used to use this all back in the day. I still use it now. I'm with the holidays rolling around. I've tried to cut back on my gambling. I've stated before. It's been a running joke on the Locked On NHL national show with my co-host Chris Maselli. I'm down bad. I have not won a bet since July. So, but you can. I believe in you guys. Don't believe in me, because right now I'm a mush. But you guys can, and you can do it with the best odds in the game at betonline.net. They're the fastest and easiest way to get all your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So heading into our second segment, we're talking about Steven Stamkos. Netted his 500th. Still crazy to think about, a 500th career assist on the Alex Killorn OT winner. That gave the Lightning, obviously, the win, because that's how overtime works. 5-4 win in overtime. And, I've spoken about the greatness of Steven Stamkos quite a bit on this show. And I've oftentimes compared him to, if he were to able to stay healthy, and we've detailed and documented, and not only on this show, I mean, anywhere you find out any media relating to the Tampa Bay Lightning, it's almost always spoken about. I think almost with every guest we've ever had on this show, we've spoken about Steven Stamkos to a certain extent, and his legacy and what he means to the franchise. But I've always spoken about Steven Stamkos, what his ceiling might have been. If the injury bug was able to kind of stay at bay, we could have seen Alexander Ovechkin numbers. Now, whether Stamkos would be in the conversation to break Wayne Gretzky's record is a completely, totally different conversation for another day. I think we're going to say that for the offseason, because very interesting. Steven Stamkos is coming up on a point in his career now where he's going to start putting himself in conversations with some big names. Now, just to put it into perspective, he's played 938 games. He has 489 goals, and his 500 assists. When you combine all that together, puts him at 989 points. So a lot of milestones coming up on the horizon. You got 1,000 games, you got 500 goals, and you got 1,000 points coming up right around the corner for him. And it's crazy to think about when you look at his numbers. And if you want to follow along, go on hockeyreference.com, because that's where I'm looking right now. As we all know, the last season was his first 100-point season, which is crazy to think about when you look at the amount of points that he's accumulated over the course of his career. Even crazier to think about when we're having this conversation talking about him having more assists than goals, and that just shows you. And I've spoken about it here and there. When I have had my conversations or comparisons between him and Alexander Ovechkin. Now, obviously, very few goal scorers, and for good reason. I mean, the numbers don't lie. There are very few goal scorers other than the ones ahead of him in hockey history that can rival that of the ability of Alexander Ovechkin. And I've just always made that comparison between him and Stamkos, just because of their sweet spots on the ice and their ability to do certain things. Now, I having said that, I've always been a firm believer that Stamkos is a more diverse player, or actually more dynamic player. Excuse me. And the numbers don't lie. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and have a full on conversation about, who's better all around game. I'm not going to have that conversation. I think a lot of people would differ. It doesn't matter. Really, what I think matters, and really where Stamkos sits in hockey history, NHL history at least, is you got to look at what he's done in terms of not so much individual awards. You got to look at what he has done as a captain, what he has done as a leader. And I know that you can't just get into the Hall of Fame based off of being a leader. I mean, if we had that requirement, or just that minimum requirement, actually, I think a good number. I would say probably 90% of all hockey players, NHL players, would get in. As I have an ad on the website playing for Hockey Reference, so thank you to that Hockey Reference. But what I'm trying to say is that he is one of the best all-time leaders. He's definitely one of the best all-time captains. Um, you know, Having to lead a team, because let's make no mistake about it. If you want to look at leadership defined, especially with Steven Stamkos, one of his defining moments as a captain was the 2020 bubble. I think that really, regardless if you want to say that was all him or not, because really he only did play one playoff game, and that was that goal in Game 5. So, really being able, and he definitely did do a lot in the dressing room between that time. Then being off the ice, being able to talk to his teammates. When I spoke to Ross Colton, it was either during the interview or after the interview. We were talking for a little bit, and then I also spoke to Corey Perry on the side as well when I had him on the show. And then I've had Jay Feaster on here. I've had Dave Randorf, and everyone has said, if you look at the ideal picture perfect, at least modern day hockey player, as to who personifies leadership and really integrity and everything that you want in someone, it's Steven Stamkos, and he does it all, and you could see the numbers don't lie. He is one of those players that, all right, you need me to score, I'll score more. And we saw that in the beginning of the season when the Lightning were struggling. You need me to allow other players to get things going. I'll pass the puck more. And you don't stumble into 500 career assists, and so his ability to do that as well, it shows in the stats. You need me to get physical. We know that Steven Stamkos has never been shy about being a physical hockey player. So really, I think, in my opinion, now maybe this is recency bias, maybe this is just overall bias, because this is I watch the Lightning on a nightly basis. I cover the Lightning. This is a podcast about the Lightning. Maybe I'm just being a little bit biased, but top 5 greatest captain of all time, top 5 greatest leader of all time. I mean, the guys ahead of him, if you want to have the top 5 or the Mount Rushmore of captains in the National Hockey League history, I think it's him, Gene Bellevue, Steve Yzerman, Mark Messier, and probably wild card in there would probably, for me, would be, I mean, you could probably put Sid in there. I think that's probably a no-brainer. That's probably the one that a lot of people would throw in there. But I think Jonathan Taves, um, being able to captain, especially those great Blackhawks teams, every couple of years or so to a Stanley Cup, when you're playing alongside Barry and Hossa, when you have Corey Crawford, when the list goes on, Patrick Kane, the list goes on, Duncan Keith, the amount of names that I could list off from that team alone, and I'm sure we could do the same for all those other teams and guys that I even missed. So you know what? I definitely think you have to throw Stamkos on that list, regardless of all the other names that you would throw out there. As to where he probably finishes all time, I guess if this is the prediction part of the segment, I would say probably it's tough because we all know how susceptible he is to injury. And I don't want to throw out some crazy number that Steven Stamkos is going to score 700 goals. I wouldn't do that. I don't think that's a realistic number, especially by the way, as already stated, that the way he plays the game. I still think though that I wouldn't underscore him in terms of where we think he's going to be at the end of his career. Now he is 32. He's turning 33 in February. So 49 goals here now. I would say probably 620 is the ceiling. That may sound a little crazy. 620, I'll say I'll put out a range. How about this? Low minimal, I would say 589 to 620. I think that's a good range for goals. Points, I would say around, if not spot on, to the 1200 point mark. I think he'll get a little bit more than that. I think he'll get like 1250, maybe 1300. It really depends on what this team needs him to do down the line. I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes over the next couple of years in personnel. The good thing about 91 is that he is able to fill a lot of roles on the ice offensively. So really, you can't really pinpoint a ceiling for him in terms of where he's going to be, in terms of numbers. Now, legacy, he's number one, I think, in the franchise. I think we could all agree on that. All time, if we're just talking about forwards, if I would say he's at least top 50. A lot of people might disagree with that. But I mean, if, like I said, for the reasons that I've already stated, I mean, if you're looking at him captaining back-to-back Stanley Cup championship teams, I definitely think he will be bumped up into the conversation of top 50 at least all time if he's not already there already. I mean, this is an off-season segment. This is what this is turning into. But I think that you really have to take a lot of stock into this. And this goes for pretty much every player that was on that Lightning team. Vazzy, Cooch, Point, maybe. Point still has a lot of way to go. So does Kucherov. Vazzy, I think he's starting. I think if Vasilevsky wins another Vezina and another cup, I think the conversation will have to be made. Is he one of the best of all time? But yeah, let's stay on topic and say real quick that I think if Stamkos, if we're looking at the COVID bubble and what he did and what the team did the next season and then last season as well, and just his overall career as a whole, I think that one can make the conversation that Stamkos at one point, if not already now, will be top 50 in NHL history for the top 50 greatest players of all time. So wrapping up the show, the Lightning have Calgary tomorrow night at Emily. So good to see that they have another home game. We're kind of I like this homestead. I said it a couple of weeks ago that I really think that Western Conference trip was really going to be a big deal. It was really going to allow them to get a lot of momentum underneath their skates heading into a very important homestand. And now they got Nashville coming up on the weekend. So we're not going to go too far, but definitely two very tough matchups for two very similar, in terms of record at least, teams. As it stands right now going into the Calgary game, Tampa is fourth, tied for third actually with Florida. I don't know how much we should measure that, because this Florida team this year, it's very different to me, and maybe one can make the argument that Huberdeau isn't there anymore, and now we have Kachuk, who I said in the offseason, he's a very skilled player. When the trade was made and it was announced that he was coming to Florida, he's a very skilled player. Um, but he doesn't scare me. This Florida team over the last couple of years, yeah, they've made strides, but they don't scare me one bit. They're not a team that I really look on the schedule. I mean, last year they did. They did, especially going into that second round, especially after and all the chips were in their favor. I mean, let's not revisit that. They had every chance in the world to beat the Lightning, and look what happened. But um really what it comes down to, I'm not scared of Florida. I'm not scared of Detroit. Well, Detroit worries me, but they're not a team that I'm like constantly looking at the division like, oh, what did Detroit do tonight? Where are they now? They're gaining ground. No, I don't. That's not a team that really worries me. Toronto definitely doesn't worry me at all. It's the Bruins who are the team obviously in first place with 28 points. They're a team that I feel like, they're getting back Jacob Swayman, I think, in the next couple of weeks at goaltender, who I've criticized in the past, thinking that was a little. I'm surprised you're putting all your eggs into the Jacob Swayman basket there in Boston. But the fact that they are not showing any signs of slowing down, and we kind of figured that if they were going to get off to a bad start this year with a couple of their big guns being out, if off the top of my head, I believe it was Bergeron and Marchand that were out to start the season, two of their better players, and I think Pastrnak was missing some time here, and then Taylor Hall's is kind of floating under the radar for me, which tells me that he's probably going to get hot at some time. But yeah, they're a team that really scares me because they have a ton of experience, just like Tampa Bay. They have a ton of experience at winning. Um, they're not too far removed from being in the Stanley Cup final. So, everybody forgets that they're the team that lost to St. Louis in 19. So, I really think that's the team. It's kind of a throwback to 2020. I mean, that was the whole conversation. If you go back to any of the episodes that year, that's all we were talking about. What are the Bruins doing tonight? Who are they playing tonight? How can the Lightning close the gap? I mean, that was really the conversation the entire month before COVID hit. But yeah, I think, really at the end of the day, Tampa are the master of their destiny. I think they need to go out there and just win games, accumulate points, finish off games in regulation. If they could cut down on the mistakes, if they could cut down on the overtime games or the shootouts, I think they'll be putting themselves in a good situation come New Year. So we'll keep an eye on the standings. I really am not that intent on really watching the standings that close in the season. We're only 16 games in. We have a ton of hockey left to play. But we'll update this. We'll update you on the standings and where I believe everybody is and do they deserve to be there? Should they be there? And also tune into the Locked On NHL national show every Thursday, where me and my co-host Chris Masilli from Locked On Avs, we rank all 32 teams. Last week we did it by division. We still haven't decided whether or not we're going to stick to that. But check that out every Thursday. And this week we'll be having a guest co-host. Chris is on vacation, so we're going to have Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers on. Love always co-hosting with Armando. We're doing crossovers, so a little bit of a different, I guess, opinion. We're gonna see where Armando rates, the Lightning, where he rates his Panthers, and where he rates the rest of the league. So check that out tomorrow, as well as our recap of the Calgary game. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.